The recording is in progress. So I will reintroduce myself now, also for the audience online. My name is Katerina Anastasiou, and I will be moderating today's session. I come originally from Greece. I live in Vienna, Austria, and I'm a facilitator for Transform Europe. My topics are migration and global strategy, migration peace. And yeah, I have the pleasure to moderate today's workshop. As you see, we're in this real hybrid format. So Christy is going to be here with us physically, but the rest of the speakers are joining us online. And yes, now introducing a little bit the workshop. We have a lot of valuable contributions coming in, and we have just 1.5 hours. So I kind of figure out we're going to have some initial inputs by the speakers, about 5 minutes, and then we're going to try to enter in a discussion with each other. At some point, we're going to have to leave this room because another workshop will take place later on. If we in the group here, being physically together, have the need to talk and continue talking, I suggest already we go to the garden outside and we keep discussing. Is it okay with you? Great. So today's discussion is about racism and war. And what we want to explore together is how these two things, or both things, are in the West was at the time. And at the same time, the current wars that are happening in the last decades after the Second World War are also fueling racism on the other hand, having racism on the end of receiving refugees, receiving migration. And we're going to try to figure out how we can untangle this together. So for this reason, I have invited people that are experts in the field to share their thoughts. And you're going to hear about how they work in order to stop both, to end racism and war at the same time. So now I want to introduce everyone correctly. So I'm going to open up my Word document. The first one with us, firstly, I'd like to give the floor to Christina Maria Zamoza Gomez from WILP, Spain, the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. Christina is a PhD candidate for international law, and she's a member of the international of the WILP for Spain. So I think I will let Christina say more about WILP. I think it's better if everybody hears it from you. WILP is the oldest women peace organization in the world. And they just celebrated some anniversaries this year.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi? Okay, perfect. Well,
if you can speak up a little bit more up.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. The International League for Women and Peace, for Peace and Freedom, there have several sections around the world. WILP is an international NGO. It's have an international secretariat based in Geneva and an office in New York too, focused on work at the United Nations. Since its creation in 1913, WILP has brought together women from all over the world, joining by its work for peace through no violence means the promotion of economic, political, and social justice for all. And WILP, our organization has a consultative state in the United Nations. That is what I want to share with you. Thank you, Kate.
No, but you can go ahead with your input, Christina, immediately.
Okay, perfect. I want to focus in this morning I want to focus on the development for the refugee and migrant in Latin America. I am glad because I already heard that there are a lot of people from Latin America. And I wanted to focus on this develop for refugee and migrants in the region and the hate speech scaling the situation. And as you know, these days in Latin America region is immersed in an unprecedented experience of human mobility with the so-called Venezuelan Exodus. So due to the serious structural and systemic crisis that plague the country, that plague Venezuela, we have to remember that Venezuela has been under a state of exception during 5 years. So the result of that situation is the neighboring countries such as Colombia, Ecuador and Peru are the main destination for Venezuelan people seeking international protection. So we are in the presence of the largest human mobility event in all America. The official figures shows approximately 5.6 million people in the process of mobility. According to the platform Air4V, it's a platform created by the International Organization for Migration and the Office of United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. Well, so due to this country, Colombia, Ecuador and Peru have carried out a certain adjustment in their refugees policies that have implied change in their administrative procedures in response for these refugee claims. One point that I want to say that in these mobility circumstances, the most affected people are women and children because they have to face a specific gender and childhood violence. Well, in some cases, the reaction of these states against the Venezuelan community can be described, or we can describe as institutional xenophobia, such as formal or informal. For example, the direct expulsion of Venezuelan people. That facts have portrayed migrants as invaders. Okay, even during the COVID crisis, the states have delegated the protection of the migrant community in this country to international organization. For us, this is a form of an institutional xenophobia by default. Well, it is emerging a feeling of Venezuelan phobia, as we called, as hatred toward everything that has to be with has to do with the Venezuelan, right? So, well, this is what I wanted to share with you. That there is institutional xenophobia framed in the Venezuelan Exodus, and I hope that we can discuss this with my college and with everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christina. Thank you for your initial input. I think we should try today to find these similarities, right? Also, these kind of mechanisms that enable this kind of violence against refugees and migrants. And what you basically see in Europe for sure, but I guess it's the same in the United States and in Latin America, is this construction of people of the move as a threat. And this is also how it is discussed in the public discussion, in the media. This is how politicians refer to it. If you take time to look at the risk analysis of the European Union, for example, you'll see migration as one of the biggest threats posed to the Union. So let's take it from there, see how it is discussed, and then find ways to break them down. Okay. I would like to now give the floor to a very, very dear friend and comrade of mine, Nassim Lomani. Nassim is a migrant from Afghanistan. He is an active member of the Migrant Social Center in Athens. If you have visited the city, you've been there. If you haven't done so, do that. Nassim lives in Greece for many, many years, and he's an activist of social and political rights, including migrant and refugee rights in Europe and beyond. And he's going to talk to us about his experiences now.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you for being there. I'm so glad to share some very few thoughts about the topic today. I have been asked to talk a bit at the beginning about the situation. You already know about the last improvement of the situation in Afghanistan, the Taliban takeover of the power after 20 years of a break, of a war of imperialism and geopolitics. And we go back to the same situation that it was 20 years ago, from 1996 to 2001, when the attacks happened in New York. The point is that the situation is very complicated at the moment, in sense that we have a different type of the terrorism in power. We have Taliban back in power, which have been trained and learned very much the last 20 years to play very much with the international media, to represent themselves in a different way without being changed in reality, without having any change on their policies or on the way that they see the country, the people, the rights of the women and minorities, and of course the rights of those people who are living in this country. We have Taliban in power since 15 of August 2021, which was a result of an agreement between US with the Trump administration and Taliban in Qatar, with an agreement which allows or which shows the green light to Taliban to take over the power. I think it's really important to say that of corrupted and mafia were supported by the Western powers, and this has a direct effect to the situation we are living now. Taliban came in power. They do not use the same methodology that it was used in previous time. They don't say publicly, or they don't do publicly the crimes that they were used to do, but in reality they do the same exactly practices that they believe, and they are on it. What I mean is that in the previous time that I remember, when I was in Afghanistan, that was the reason that I left. All the crimes of Taliban was public. They were doing whatever they were doing. They were killing people. They were committing genocides, they were murdering women, they were taking the rights of the majority of people, which is which are minorities and women. Better now we respect the international rules or the international laws or whatever, but in the background of the scene, they do exactly the same crimes. I can give you an example of those women who are protesting against Taliban and for their basic rights from the first day Taliban took power and came in Kabul. And most of those women have been murdered hiddenly at home, or have been imprisoned, or have been tortured. The same is with the freedom of speech. Have been many journalists and people who are working for the media have been tortured and have been killed. And of course, there is a huge danger for all the other people who have been part of the 20 years of the situation in Afghanistan. I think the most important things, which I can end with, that is that pressure in all the countries, in all levels, to the governments of different countries, is to push to not be recognized this regime as a legal representative of the country. I think it's a struggle for peace. It's a struggle for the rights of those people. It's a struggle that can also, even if they remain in power, it can be a real pressure to this regime of the terrorism, a regime of Sharia, which will not respect any rights, any life of women, activists, and minorities. I think this is the strategy that we have to follow, and this is a pressure that we can put to our countries. Maybe Afghanistan is too far, but we can do this pressure to our countries, to our governments, to not recognize this regime. Connected with this issue, I think, is the huge propaganda that is coming out since the first day that Taliban took power. You remember all of those images from the airport of Kabul when people were leaving the country. I think they were images of the century. I think this described the situation we are living in. And I think this is partly the reality of the situation in Afghanistan. The big part of the population, they will try to leave because there is no any hope of fighting until the fall of this regime. So people believe that the only way that they can survive is to leave the country. The same time, from the first moment, there has been this Western propaganda, or there have been this Western policy of stopping those people to leave the country, or what they call is to find solution for those people within the country or in the neighboring countries of Afghanistan. That's how also in all the borders there have been a very strong border controlling. There have been pushbacks, deportations, or those who tried to leave the country have been sent back, or there is a big operation of not allowing them to leave the country. And ending with the situation in Europe, I think you saw a few days ago when the G20 took place, the meeting of G20, they agreed to fund 1 billion euro to the situation in Afghanistan. And I'm afraid this fund will not go to the people who are in need. It will go to the regime of Taliban, which they will agree on stopping migrants and refugees who are trying to leave Afghanistan to reach Western and to reach Europe. So there is a big fear, or there's a big propaganda in Western countries in Europe that we are in danger of living again 2015 on the borders of Europe. I think this is another point that we have to to rise. We have to discuss, we have to talk about that these wars of imperialism, these wars of terrorism and anti-terrorism caused the new wave of migration or new wave of refugees that they try to leave Afghanistan and try to reach Europe. I think it is the Western's responsibility. It is their, they have to create a safe way for those people to reach. Taliban take over of the power after 20 years of a break of a war of imperialism and geopolitics. And we go back to the same situation that it was 20 years ago, from 1996 to 2001, when the attacks happened in New York. The point is that the situation is very complicated at the moment, in sense that we have a different type of the terrorism in power. We have Taliban back in power, which have been trained and learned very much the last 20 years to play very much with the international media, to represent themselves in a different way without being changed in reality, without having any change on their policies or on the way that they see the country, the people, the rights of the women and minorities, and of course the rights of those people who are living in this country. We have Taliban in power since 15 of August 2021, which was a result of an agreement between US with the Trump administration and Taliban in Qatar, with an agreement which allows or which shows the green light to Taliban to take over the power. I think it's really important to say that even during the 20 years of the occupation of the country by the Western powers, NATO and America, the situation was very bad. We had a government of corrupted and mafia were supported by the Western powers. And this has a direct effect to the situation we are living now. Taliban came in power. They do not use the same methodology that it was used in previous time. They don't say publicly, or they don't do publicly the crimes that they were used to do. But in reality, they do the same exactly practices that they believe, and they are on it. What I mean is that in the previous time that I remember when I was in Afghanistan, that was the reason that I left. All the crimes of Taliban was public. They were doing whatever they were doing. They were killing people. They were committing genocides. They were murdering women. They were taking the rights of the majority of people, which are minorities and women. But this time they are coming out in public and they are saying, we change, we are better now, we respect the international rules or the international laws or whatever. But in the background of the scene, they do exactly the same crimes. I can give you an example of those women who are protesting against Taliban and for their basic rights from the first day Taliban took power and came in Kabul. And most of those women have been murdered hiddenly at home, or have been imprisoned, or have been tortured. The same is with the freedom of speech. Have been many journalists and people who are working for the media have been tortured and have been killed. And of course, there is a huge danger for all the other people who have been part of the 20 years of the situation in Afghanistan. I think the most important things which I can end with that is that a pressure in all the countries, in all levels, to the governments of different countries is to push to not be recognized this regime as a legal representative of the country. I think it's a struggle for peace. It's a struggle for the rights of those people. It's a struggle that can also, even if they remain in power, it can be a real pressure to this regime of the terrorism, a regime of Sharia, which will not respect any rights, any life of women, activists, and minorities. I think this is the strategy that we have to follow, and this is a pressure that we can put to our countries. Maybe Afghanistan is too far, but we can do this pressure to our countries, to our governments, to not recognize this regime. Connected with this issue, I think, is the huge propaganda that is coming out since the first day that Taliban took power. You remember all of those images from the airport of Kabul when people were leaving the country. I think it is, they were images of the century. I think this describes the situation we are living in. And I think this is partly the reality of the situation in Afghanistan. The big part of the population, they will try to leave because there is no any hope of fighting until the fall of this regime. So people believe that the only way that they can survive is to leave the country. The same time, from the first moment, there has been this Western propaganda, or there have been this Western policy of stopping those people to leave the country, or what they call is to find solution for those people within the country or in the neighboring countries of Afghanistan. That's how also in all the borders there have been a very strong border controlling. There have been pushbacks, deportations, or those who tried to leave the country have been sent back, or there is a big operation of not allowing them to leave the country. And ending with the situation in Europe, I think you saw a few days ago when the G20 took place, the meeting of G20, they agreed to fund 1 billion euro to the situation in Afghanistan. And I'm afraid this fund will not go to the people who are in need. It will go to the regime of Taliban, which they will agree on stopping migrants and refugees who are trying to leave Afghanistan to reach Western and to reach Europe. So there is a big fear, or there's a big propaganda in Western countries in Europe that we are in danger of living again 2015 on the borders of Europe. I think this is another point that we have to rise, we have to discuss, we have to talk about, that these wars of imperialism, these wars of terrorism and anti-terrorism caused the new wave of migration, or new wave of refugees that they try to leave Afghanistan and try to reach Europe. I think it is the Western's responsibility. It is their, they have to create a safe way for those people to reach safety and asylum in the other countries. The truth is that always when there is a conflicts in a country, when there is a problem in a country that people are living, the majority of people will go to the neighboring countries. They will not reach. Migration is not just a matter of willing, it's also a matter of possibilities, physical, economical, psychological possibilities. So those people will not, all of them will be able to reach Europe, but the small part of them, when they try to reach Europe, we have to create movements of welcoming those people, to praise the countries, to accept them, and to give them asylum and protection. I think at the moment, there is around 50,000 people in Greece. Half of them, they're Afghans, the other half are from different other countries. There is a very strong propaganda from the Greek government, and of course with the support of European Union, to keep those people out of the country, or to push them in a way to accept or return back, or at least to give an example to the rest of the people to not reach Europe and Greece. And the last very short point is about the process of pushback. This is how the militarized and externalized border regimes are working. The Greek government is doing a very illegal process of pushback, sending people when they reach the borders in the Aegean Sea. It's not only happening in Greece, of course, in the Mediterranean Sea is the same, but the reports of the humanitarian and human rights organizations is shocking. The reports of big media is even shocking. How many people have been sent back illegally back to the danger of Turkey or Iran, or even sending back to the home countries where their lives are in danger. I will stop here, and I'm happy to answer any question and to discuss further about everything. Thank you for the chance.
Thank you very much, Nassim. Very important points you made. I hope we come back to them as well. I'm just cherry picking two of the points you made, also introducing the next speaker. Also welcome, Kazembe. Nice to have you here. I realize it's very early in the morning where you are, so thank you for joining us. Two important things that Nassim said. First of all, we have to mobilize in order not to get the Taliban regime normalized. And it seems there has been an agreement or we are on the way of an agreement between Taliban and Western world, just to have the Taliban containing people that are trying to leave the country. And this is nothing new. This is also the EU-Turkey deal that has been signed 2016. So it seems to be a tendency of solving migration, if migration would actually be a problem. The third thing that is very important to keep in mind is pushbacks. Why? Because pushbacks are illegal according to international law. But what you do see in Europe is pushbacks taking place in the Mediterranean, at the Greek-Turkish borders, through along the Balkan route, but also within the European Union borders. You have pushbacks from France to Italy taking place. You have pushbacks from Italy to Slovenia taking place. And you even have chain pushbacks taking place within European borders. So practically with the talk, and you have the UK government, I have to name them as well, publicly saying we are going to do pushbacks, which is another escalation towards international law and human rights, and what that means, because practically you have a government official saying, yes, we're willing to break international law. This is how we're going to handle the situation. So I would now like to pass the floor to Marga Ferre. Marga Ferre is the co-president of Transform Europe, and she's also the president of FEC. And La FEC is based in Madrid. And I have to pronounce it now in Spanish. It's the Fundación por la Europa de los Ciudadanos, so the Foundation for the Europe of Citizens. Marga, the floor is yours. Look forward to your input.
Thank you very much, Caterina. I hope everybody can hear me well. Well, I'm Marga Ferrer, I'm based in Madrid. I'm a Spaniard. I'm the co-chair of Transform Europe, and it's a great pleasure to be with all of you. Well, I'm going to make a short contribution more in a theoretical way if I can, because I'm impressed because of your experience from Venezuela, from Afghanistan, and the level of the participants in the room. I can see come from all around the world, particularly from around Europe, very young people. So what can I, how can I go to the point with the question of militarism and racism? You know? So as becoming an old lady, I would like to recommend two books or two texts trying to go to the point of the relationship, how colonialism, militarism, and racism is a constructive way of the domination. No? The first text is a very classical one. If the young people have not read it, please do it. It's Frantz Fanon, The Wretched of the Earth. In Spanish is Los Condenados de la Tierra, from Frantz Fanon. Frantz Fanon was a psychiatric, also studied in Algeria when Algeria was occupied by the French people. And he made all the theory analyzing how colonialism works and how this colonialization is linked with both things. The construction of the racism as a way of denigrating a group of human beings in order to exploit them better. Not only human beings by the resources of the country, but which is more important and is related with the Afghanistan situation, how this colonialism create a middle class or a bourgeoisie inside the country dominated to follow the metropolis agenda. No? So we can see not only in Afghanistan how after 20 years of occupation, nothing really changed, and it was a corrupted system with a narco traffic of opium after 20 years of occupation. We must go also in the corruption, which is systematically linked with the colonization process that was the Frantz Fanon in this book. Why we say corruption? Because I would like to go with Nassim later with a question about the corruption in the military forces in Afghanistan, because it's privatized. It's not like the traditional armies. Is privatized to private companies. No? I would like to see this connection also because it also has to link with the way we must understand and to fight for peace, no? in a better way. So please read this book, The Wretched of the Earth, because I think it's essential to understand the colonial phenomenon. But now, after all these years, we see that there is a double phenomenon, which is that with a colonization or neo-colonization process, because it's not the way the colonialism is doing today is not like in the past century. We now see some kind of neo-colonization, not only based on military occupation, but in an economic pressure and in a cultural domination too. We all see with China, with the US, of course, or Europe at the same time. So it's a new way of colonization using the hybrid words, which is a menace of military forces, but at the same time using the international law or don't respecting the international law in some cases. But my point, going to the second text, I would like to recommend you, hardly recommend it to you. When I read the title of this wonderful seminar organized by CAT, which is militarism and racism, beyond these things. How can we go beyond? No? I remember one speech made by Dr. Martin Luther King in 1967, which was called Beyond Vietnam, How to Break the Silence. No? It's a mythical speech in where Martin Luther King did something amazing, which is the thesis of the Martin Luther King is, if we have a foreign policy based on domination and violence, this domination and violence is coming back home. Meaning that if the US or every potential in Europe have a violent and an aggressive and not respecting human rights foreign policies, they will do the same at home. And this is the basis of the institutional racism also in the US, linked with the army in the Vietnam. I mean, Kasembe is with us, and no, Kasembe can explain more than this. But I like this because sometimes we see the European Union, I mean, people in Europe, Europe is not the European Union, it's not Brussels, it's not the government, it's the people of Europe. No? That also suffer from this institutional racism and at the same time suffering from the authoritarian or violent law that some countries are applying in different parts of the world. So it's this double thing that Martin Luther King wrote it in this beautiful speech. I highly recommend it to read it because I think it's very, very, very actual. So I would like to finish this just with some ideas that came in the last years. No? In the past, because I'm 50 something, so I see the young people pushing together things that the progressive forces in the past making in a very separated ways. No? And I think it's one of the key of how can we fight for a peaceful world, no? Which is linking peace movement, feminist movement, anti-racist movement, of course, and environmental things, because have a same origin in some ways, and how can interconnect intersectionality that the feminists will said, no, of all these issues in a broader outlook of what is happening in the world, because sometimes the reason is the same one. Just to remind you that the main industry in making emissions for climate change is the military industry. So we need in this forum also to bring it together. It's not only a question of human beings, it's also respecting the earth. You know? And also because I honestly think that we are in a world where geopolitical things are changing. And I honestly think that the majority of the young people in this world, particularly you who are very, very conscious of these questions, has a strong values defending peace, defending a planet, I mean, between confronting climate change and a feminist and equal world. No? So these strong values had to be confronted with the governments, even with the United Nations, no action in some places like in Afghanistan, and of course, defending a world organized in a different way. Just to finish in that this year, two things will happen that I think requires our attention. How can we also to push in another direction? The first one is the NATO Summit, who will take place in June in Madrid, in my city, because NATO wants to reshape itself and wants to have the right to intervene in different countries, not only the signatories of the NATO Charter, which is only 29 countries. They want to go beyond, no? And also that forced the European Union, making for the first time in like 10 or 15 years, Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the European Commission, in the speech of the State of the Nation of the European Union 1 month ago, she spoke on the idea of the European Union having a particularly right to intervene in military terms beyond the United Nations and beyond the US. No? It's coming again to the idea of the European army, or the idea of the Europe having the right to intervene militarily speaking. I think we can stop it. I mean, because the European population is not, I think the European population is not going to accept a war, another war like Iraq or Libya like in the past. Honestly, I think so. I think we can stop it. But at the same time, there are some alerts, no, for all of us in order to push another agenda who put the human beings at the center of everything. Just to finish in, that I like very much the speak of Nassimi on Afghanistan. And I think if this seminar can have a recommendation for the International World Congress in Barcelona for not recognizing the Taliban regime and to open the borders for the refugee, respecting the international law, the asylum law, it will be a contribution for this seminar to something that we consider it important. Thank you very much.
Oh. Thank you very much, Marga, for your contribution. I'm going to give the floor now to Carrie first, and Kazemba, you can get prepared. You're going to be the next one. And Chrissy, I'm going to close with you because we're going to switch positions so the people online can hear you better, right? So I'm very happy to have Carrie Hall with us. Carrie is a racial justice activist working on the Abolished Frontex campaign, with a focus on anti-imperialism, and her works looks at how US and European empire ferment hybrid warfare on the global south. Carrie, I'm very happy to welcome you here and meeting you somewhere else outside Signal Chats. Very nice.
Thanks so much, Katerina. It's so nice to meet you. And Marga, it's great that you've just ended your speech, because a lot of what I'm here to talk about today is the way in which race and war interact. I kind of want to start off with my own personal story about when COVID-19 hit. Some very, very racist tropes about my community, my family, and just about me in general arose. You may have all seen it. Clips of East Asian people eating strange foods going viral, cementing this trope of like the dirty, poor Oriental people causing viruses through wet markets and animal abuse. And then we saw a spike in hate crimes. from the killings of Tan Tan Thuy in the US to increased reports of harassment and violence against people who look like me, Asian people in Europe and around the world. Media were quick to like grab like any Asian that they had in the close proximity when they see racism becoming a huge topic in the media. And they commissioned these very sentimental think pieces that blamed really easy targets. It's Trump's fault, it's conservatives, it's the uneducated, it's COVID paranoia. It's these feelings of hate that individuals just have against people of color. And what I found strikingly like left out of this narrative for me was military empire and the US's brewing Cold War against China, which will be one of the biggest topics we have to tackle as anti-racist and anti-war activists in the near future. So whenever I feel as if like anti-imperialists or anti-war activists talk about the military, we all of a sudden sound like super conspiratorial, and that we get really paranoid because everything is connected by the military. But I kind of want to take you through this narrative of the journey that I've actually undertaken in the last, I would say, 4 years. It's at the end of the Obama administration, which was spearheaded by Hillary Clinton, where they launched a strategy, a military strategy called the Pivot to Asia. This focused billions of dollars of military spending away from the Middle East, like Afghanistan and Iraq, and towards Asia. So it was really clear back then that the US empire had a new target, and that was China. Slowly, I began to see more and more arms companies, interestingly dressed up as think tanks, peddle these hysterical news about China. It began to dominate, mainstream media without any critique. So you may actually have heard of some of these narratives. One might be that China is seeking debt trap diplomacy within Africa. So Europe has to go and counter that. China has a social credit system that's controlling all people. China has developed a virus in like a shady lab in Wuhan. If any of you have actually read some of this and actually before this speech thought this was true, go actually look this up. All of this has actually been disproven as disinformation, propaganda and disinformation. Human rights abuses in China suddenly became really laser focused in all of mainstream media. It like dominated the media, and governments who, let's be honest, don't really give a shit about human rights in Australia, particularly about communities of colors, started to vote to sanction China. And I could see how this narrative of like this mainstream media, governments, began to kind of walk hand in hand with the US State Department's objectives to justify increased military expenditure and boots on the ground in the Pacific. If you look at any sort of map of military that has now been moved around the world, it all now dominates around the Asia Pacific region. And whenever I point out to how like racial anxieties, such as Asian hate crimes, are the consequences to this, the way that empire operates, and COVID-19 was just this tipping point, I often feel as if I get dismissed, particularly from people in even the racial justice space, even the anti-war space, and particularly in the progressive space, because of how well this propaganda has been wielded against an enemy country that needs to be opposed because of their human rights abuses. As anti-war activists, this is not a pattern of how propaganda has been used before, okay? We've seen this when Europe bombed Libya, when the US invaded Afghanistan and Iraq, and Islamophobia ran rampant at home to justify these wars as a liberating force. If we look back in history during the Cold War, this happened when communities were targeting, when Europeans were targeting communists. Anti-war really means deconstructing empire and the new ways empire manufacturers are consent to go to war. This is both the US empire, but also European empire. We have to have an analysis of war, more accurately what I would call imperialism, and how it comes from a profit motive. The US, who dominates capital markets, they fear China's economic growth. Vladimir Lenin wrote about this 100 years ago and how imperialism is the highest stage of capitalism, when he pointed to how World War I was an imperialist war to protect colonial interests of Europeans. We can see this again with the US withdrawal of Afghanistan after it has taken and extracted material wealth and resources from these countries. So even though warfare and imperialism is changing and has changed in the last 100 years, it's no longer like boots on the ground. The motivation hasn't changed at all. The colonizers, which I regard as the global north, Europeans, where we situate ourselves today. I'm from Australia, which is also part of a colonizing core. They want to set the rules to continue capital domination and resources and labor exploitation of the previously colonized, as Marga pointed out, in the global south. Europe's foreign policy and histories of colonialism has set up these racist structures. So, Europeans will, and the US empires will go bomb and underdevelop and bleed the global south dry of resources. And we, people of color, we're forced to move. And when we do move, our movement is securitized, as everyone has pointed out today. You know, it's framed as a military threat and needed a policing response. And we see this with the thousands of people who have died trying to seek asylum to Europe, being stopped by fortress Europe borders. When Western empires go to war or have strategic interests overseas, racist tropes are deployed and dehumanized so that it manufactures consent in the public to wage war and warfare. This has happened in the last 200 years. Look at any propaganda that has been deployed to justify warfare overseas, and the same tropes are used again and again and again. We see that with, like I said, Islamophobia that's happening in France right now with protecting Muslim women against their own religion of wearing a hijab. We see this in the US's constant covert intervention in Latin American politics, which leads to refugees having to leave their countries. And we're seeing this now with the US's pivot to China. So I think I just want to leave off with saying when we fight racism, we must understand how war works. When we oppose war, we have to understand how racism works and is deployed. And when we campaign as anti-racism activists, as people who are campaigning against war and for peace, we have to oppose empire that currently controls capital. And to leave off, I want to just say one of the best examples I've seen in this, and this could be, I'm a little bit biased because I'm also working on this campaign, is the Abolished Frontex campaign. You all probably know that Abolished Frontex is, Frontex is one of the EU's largest militarized border institutions and has led to the deaths of 1,000 asylum seekers. But one of the greatest things that I've seen is that it's a decentralized campaign, it's autonomous, it works with groups not only just in Europe, but outside of Europe, because Europe's borders go beyond our own. And it takes like a really radical vision, it actually links up decolonization, freedom of movement with racial justice, and the opposition of the arms trade to end the EU's border regime. And I only think it's with these visions that we can really fight imperialism and racism.
Thank you, Carrie. That was amazing. Thank you very much. Kazembe, I would like to give the floor to you. Kazembe Balagun is a colleague of ours from the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation, New York office. How are you doing? How early is there anyway?
I am doing wonderful. Good evening, everybody. Good morning from the Bronx, New York, where I'm situated. I'm honored to be here today and with all you peace-loving people. I'm going to be brief because I think the quality of the content has been really top-notch. Thank you all for the wonderful invitation. And I do want to trail off with the sister comrade Carrie had left off, and to remind ourselves that militarism always comes with racism, right? Like they go hand in hand. And what Margaret said, Dr. Martin Luther King, when he made that speech, April 3rd, 1967, in Riverside Church, he said the connection between militarism, triple evils of war, racism, and militarism all go hand in hand. So even during the quote unquote good war of World War II, that thousands of Japanese Americans were interned in camps in the United States. Anti-Asian racism stemming back to the anti-Chinese law, manifesting into militarism, manifesting into the prison industrial complex. That conversation around abolition is a moral one, a one that centers our own moral sensibility about who gets to be free and who gets to be a citizen, right? I want to even take it back even further a little bit and bring in the term, another speaker, another idea, another great thinker that we lost a few years ago, the great Black Marxist Cedric Robinson, who talked about racialized capitalism, right? And our understanding of racialized capitalism starts not necessarily with the raiding of Africa, as Karl Marx once said, but actually the racialization of groups within Europe, right? And so Europe, folks in Europe were racialized even before the issue around slavery even came about. And the reason I mention this is because one of the mistakes that we make oftentimes, oops, sorry. Hello, I'm still there? Okay, great. One of the mistakes we make oftentimes is that our understanding of what constitutes whiteness. When people came to the United States, they were not white. They were Italians, they were Romanian, they were German, they were French, they were British, they were English, Irish, what have you, and then they became white. because of their relationship to the process of enslavement, but also a relationship, as my sister Carrie said, also to settler colonialism. You know, the expansion of colonialism within the borders of the United States, the destruction of Native American food sources, the expansion of slavery. These are the things in which created whiteness and created the borders in which we talk about right now. We can't talk about the borders and what's happening with our brothers and sisters in Haiti right now without talking about the expansion of slavery, right? Or even, the expansion of slavery that took place on the Western Front, right? The expansion of slavery throughout to Mississippi, throughout the West and down to Mexico, right? What I want to say also right now is that we also have to really be clear around that the crisis in which Black immigrants face in our country, right? Black immigrants in the United States are facing a double crisis, right? Much similar to what W.B. Du Bois talked about, double consciousness, a double crisis. They face a crisis of both being immigrants and being Black. And as Black immigrants, they're more likely to be detained and to be denied asylum than any other group, because the decision around the US borders is one built around white supremacy and who gets to be a citizen, who doesn't get to be a citizen. And this dovetails into fights happen domestically, particularly amongst African Americans who are fighting for their citizenship every single day, fighting for border rights, fighting for access to clean water, to clean energy, and fighting against environmental racism. And I love the fact that you brought up Margaret Fonds for Non-Wretched of the Earth. We focus a lot on the wretched part, but we don't always focus on the earth part, right? And the impact in which environmental racism is driving these issues around immigration and racism and war in a lot of different ways. And we're going to also talk about a wretched of the ocean now too, with our European brothers, our brothers and sisters from Africa trying to get into the European Europe as well, as our brother Nassim mentioned earlier today. So what I want to say is that maybe just to conclude, and I do really want to hear your thoughts, is that how do we deal with these questions around racism and militarism? I think that strategically we have to talk about a new movement in terms of divesting from militarization, both on the borders, but also within our own country. And that's a conversation that happened last year around policing in this country in the wake of George Floyd, right? And I think that woke up a lot of folks in terms of thinking about the connection between racialized policing and the racialized borders, because the same weapons that are being used on the borders are being used on us in the streets. So we have to be able to take that money and take those resources away and really go towards a critical investment in our cities, in the places in which we're most impacted. But not only that, but also do the work of also investing to our brothers and sisters in the global South as well. You know what I'm saying? And ensuring their right to livelihood, their right to live, but also their right to stay and their right to come here and seek asylum and to do that work. So I want to just leave today with a very positive note too, because a lot of times when we talk about immigration, we talk about it in terms of this numbers and subjects, this numbers and things like that. But let's just remember this, right? I live in the Bronx, New York. There's over 1.7 million Black people in the city of New York City. 40% of that number is people of color, is Black people. 1.7 million Black people in New York City. 40% of that are Black people from other parts of the world, right? So there's a high level of Black folks who live in the city who come from outside the country, right? And where has that produced for the 20th century, right? That critical mix has produced hip hop, right? It's produced salsa, right? It's produced all these other ways in which we express ourselves in the most democratic function in the world. So the addition and the bringing in of Black immigrants has also deepened our Black freedom struggle. We're talking about people like Harry Belafonte, Sidney Poitier. We're talking about people like Marcus Garvey. It's talking about people who are all people from the Caribbean or from Africa who contributed to the Black freedom struggle in this country as well. So I want to just leave with that, because I think that those things are something that we sometimes lose in these conversations around immigration. I think they're important to understand that immigration is important to, not just in terms of as a human right, but also in terms of our various cultural expressions and pushing our movements towards greater global solidarity. And I'll cede the floor at that moment. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Hi, I have another microphone on my screen. That's why it looks weird. Thank you, Kazemba, very much, also for your contribution. Timing. I mean, we literally started 10 minutes too late. So we're gonna go on until 13:40, which is another 40 minutes, because I would like to give you the floor as well, and to take the time as the other speakers, but I would like us then to enter in a more discussion format. For those of you that came later, just to let you know, the only microphone we have is on this computer, which means that if you want to pose a question to the speakers or make a statement, which you're also welcome to do, you have to enter this yellow line you see marked in front of me. If you do so, they will be able to listen to you. Otherwise, I would have to repeat your question. If you don't feel comfortable coming to the front, you're gonna say your question out loud and I'm gonna repeat it into the mic. Okay, now Chrissy, I'd like to switch places with you so they can hear you better and also see your face. Go ahead. That's the camera you're looking into. Exactly. But your voice is coming through that mic. But you can look at the camera there. They're gonna listen.
Okay. Let's see. I'll do this.
You can go ahead. Just go ahead and speak. No, don't mute yourself. You can have an echo.
If I can,
Yeah, you can pin yourself. Yes.
so that I can look
Yeah,
here
of
instead
course.
of.
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. It's really hard to follow up. From what I've already heard, I really am very honored to be in the presence of this particular circle. One of my compañeros, Ruben Castilla Herrera, presente, he always told me to trust the circle. So I know that I'm in really good hands here. And I also have been told recently that one of the best ways to combat imposter syndrome is to talk about it. So we all get nervous and we all have anxiety and insecurity. And so I'm gonna express that now so that hopefully you offer me some grace. I'm Chrissy.
Got this, sister. We're with you, sister. You got this.
We love it.
I appreciate you all so much. My name is Chrissy Stonebreaker Martinez. My family is from Colombia, but I am part of the diaspora. I live in the United States and I work in Cleveland, Ohio. So hopefully, Kazembe, I will be able to see you one day, inshallah. My organization, the Interreligious Task Force on Central America and Colombia, of which I am part of a non-hierarchical collective, though I am co-coordinator of that work. We were founded in 1980 when Jean Donovan, Dorothy Kazel, Maura Clark, and Ida Ford were killed in El Salvador by US trained and funded forces. So because of their legacy and because of a deep commitment to solidarity, we originally were founded to help people as part of the Overground Railroad and the sanctuary movement get into Canada as a Great Lakes town, as a Great Lakes city, as they awaited asylum hearings in Canada. The US has had a really long history of doing this type of thing, of not acknowledging, of course, their complicity, their not just complicity, their responsibility for the crises that are happening. And so in the case of Haiti, thank you so much for bringing this up and for making it a central point of what we're talking about today. You know, the United States acknowledging their responsibility in helping France get reparations from the country of Haiti for slavery, which is ridiculously backwards, they would have to admit that if they would have really taken the responsibility to not deport the 10,000 people that they just deported in the last few weeks from mostly Texas. So as the siblings said, we know that Afro-descendant migrants face much higher sentencing in deportation hearings, much longer terms in detention, and there's just so many, a myriad of issues with our policies there. Another issue with our policies, I know one of our siblings mentioned Hillary, and we know, there's no way to compare Trump and Hillary. It was really awful to live through the last 4 years in the United States. And at the same time, when the 2016 election was happening, it was very hard to talk about Hillary Clinton, very specifically her involvement in the coup in Honduras, during the electoral coup, the sort of soft coup as they called it, and so all of these different contradictions are something that I want to talk about today. I want to talk about a few more policies as well. You talked about pushbacks, and so one policy that has been implemented in the United States in conjunction with Guatemala. I know we have several Central Americans here in the room. Thank you so much for sharing space. It's my honor to be in your presence. There is a plan, Frontera Sur, the plan of the southern border, where the United States has been contracting with other countries to militarize even further out from the U.S. coast. So giving money to the government of Mexico to militarize the border along the Mexico-Guatemala border, and to apprehend more people there before they can even reach the US-Mexico border. So this is a part of a policy that is called by workers in the United States right now as prevention through deterrence. So this is also sort of along the same lines of what has been termed the Remain in Mexico policy, or the third safe country agreement. And this is very much illegal, as you already stated. It denies people's international right to seek asylum. It is our international right to seek asylum. And this border militarization is something that I want to highlight as well, especially because my sibling just talked about abolition, and in particular, policing in the United States. This is something that is very near and dear to my heart. 13 people have died in the county jail where I live in Cleveland in the last 2.5 years. And I've been part of an effort to shut that down and to shed light on that fact, because we know that these struggles are intimately connected. But surveillance, as we know, is a very, very profitable industry. And it has seeped into every aspect of our living. Just even here in Spain, where I don't see the same sort of engagement in social media, but I still do see people constantly, using their cell phone devices to give the whole world access to our surroundings, so that people can watch what's happening. Another problem another policy is of course, and something that is very profitable beyond the quote unquote traditional arms industry, is the chemical weapons industry. And so there is a tear gas manufacturer, the second largest in the United States, just an hour and a half away from where I live. It is in a very rural community, of course, a community with no jobs. It is in a It's in a place that is seen to be very conservative. And tear gas from this company, which is called Combined Systems Incorporated, CSI, their tear gas has been tracked to over 100 use in over 100 countries on domestic populations, even though tear gas is banned by the Geneva Conventions for use in warfare. One thing that I have heard that helped clarify some of these struggles that we've been surviving is that fascism is basically domestic imperialism. It is imperialism turned in on the authoritarian rulers, by the authoritarian rulers, I'm sorry. A couple other things that I want to add to this conversation is that Biden has actually deported and detained more people in the first 6 months of this year than in 2019 in the last administration. So as we know, the rhetoric, the narrative of what is happening in the United States is different than it has been in the last 4 years. And the outrage is, and I think that this is very much due to neoliberalism, the outrage has very much diminished. People also have fatigue. We have compassion fatigue and we have grief fatigue, right? We are living through a pandemic. Millions of people have died and we haven't had the time to process all it is that we're surviving from. However, I want to say that the term intersectionality is not new. Let me repeat that again. It is not new. Several of our siblings have already mentioned Dr. King's amazing speech, Beyond Vietnam, where he identifies the three evils of militarism, racism, and and materialism. Thank you. And we also know that Kimberly Crenshaw actually coined the term intersectionality. And I always want to make sure that we're giving credit where credit is due in this credit and merit-based society, because that term very specifically was for her experience as a Black queer femme. And so we can talk about what we have learned from intersectionality, but it is not ours to appropriate. We can understand that all of these things cross-sect with each other. I think all of the things that we're talking about are really challenging. And I think that as part of the diaspora, as someone who is displaced from my native homeland, that contributes negatively to our mental health, right? I watched my mother go through very deep depression, not having the support systems that she deserved, that she grew up with when she was trying to raise us in another place. So I don't want that to be forgotten about, but I also want to say it's not migration is so frequently forced, but it is also what has happened with the migrant caravans in along Abya Yala, along the Americas, is also kind of one of the most beautiful and largest direct actions ever, because people are migrating to, and it is because the United States and other imperial powers were in the places that we come from and have pushed us. And so you have to deal with our physical bodies now when we move. You have to deal with the fact that you have moved us. I think that the way that people feel in the dominant culture, the way that people in the dominant culture understand and really feel racism is often only surface level. Even for people with good intentions. People who may work at nonprofits and NGOs, who believe wholeheartedly that we should welcome the stranger, the dominant culture still practices white supremacy by not only waging war, but also practicing saviorism. We don't talk about or hear about why we need repair, why we need truth telling, why we need reparations, real reparations, not what Haiti was forced to give to the country of France. And we don't talk about the fact that there needs to be repair in the first place. Even neoliberals with power in the dominant culture don't accept that reparations should be made, and that they are on stolen and native land. That we are living through continued genocide in Agua Yala, and that is what Norteños would call Turtle Island in the United States. And you can't have peace without justice. We've heard that many times today and yesterday. There is a reason that we chant no justice, no peace. Of course, you can have peace in a racist society, but still, thank you for posing that important question. And unless the dominant culture is able to transform into a world where many worlds fit, like the Zapatistas have modeled for us, without anti-racism, there is no guarantee of non-repeat. And reparations requires acknowledgement of harm, that truth-telling, and a guarantee of non-repeat. Reparations is about a continued relationship. It is not transactional, and it is not a one-time event. If class struggle is resolved through an international workers' revolution, and if empire and colonial power is dismantled, both military and capitalist powers, without an anti-racist, feminist, queer ideology being at its foundation, there is no guarantee of non-repeat in this better world that we know is possible and necessary. And that's why it's difficult to trust movements, and particular environmental movements and anti-war movements that are not cross-sectional, movements that do not inherently center the roots of anti-oppression and those directly impacted by oppression. The dominant culture doesn't want us to talk about what its happiness depends on. Anti-racism is not about unity. It's not about breaking bread, that we will all get along, although those are really beautiful things. It's about accepting what most people in the dominant culture have is because of a grave injustice. And that includes wealth, power, amenities, healthcare, and even though there is a lack of that, and the existence of nation states is because of grave injustice. And as Audre Lorde said, it is not our differences that divide us. It is our inability to accept, recognize, and celebrate those differences. The perpetuation of white supremacy throughout the world through imperialism and colonialism and all the forms of white supremacy that white supremacy takes, including the ways it is ingrained in and prohibited by non-Euro descendant people. So our internalization as well. Anti-racism is about telling these truths. Strategies that will build a better world must be based on these truths. And the answer to the question, there needs to be truth about what has and continues to be done. Slavery and colonization never ended. They've only taken different forms, and disappearances and missing of human rights defenders has not ended either. Of course, as a Colombian, I know that because Colombians have had some of the highest rates of murders of human rights defenders. The only strategy there is to take to create a culture of anti-oppression is truth and acknowledgement and a guarantee of non-repeat. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chrissy. So thank you very much, Chrissy. Yeah, going to take it from here, right? I mean, I also, for the ones of you that joined us later, I already said, I do think that 90 minutes are too short for this kind of meeting. So my proposal is when our time is up inside the room, which means practically when they kick us out, before they do so, we can stay here. We're gonna continue the discussion in the park with all of you that want to do so. But now I'd like to give the floor to some of you, or maybe you want to ask some questions. We have about half an hour together here in the room left, and perhaps you want to speak to the people on Zoom directly. If you want to do so, you're either welcome to take my chair, or you can speak from there and we can check out how the audio works. I would like to facilitate a little bit an optimistic exit of this. And my proposal is to perhaps start exchanging on solidarity practices that actually help us go forward in this. For example, you know, in Greece, there are a lot of solidarity structures, occupations, providing housing. I know in the US there's similar projects, perhaps also here in Spain, you know, some from the city of Barcelona. So it would be nice to start exchanging on that. And I wanted to make also a point, and I think the discussion leads practically to that, on particularly Haiti. I will never forget the last time there was a hurricane 2 years ago, Irma, I think was the name of it. And you practically had all these people being rooted out. And this guy, Virgin Branson, or what was his name, tweeting out of his comfortable shelter how cool it is that he's stuck there in his super resilient house with his family playing Scrabble. And at the end of the day, what we're trying to deconstruct here is this narrative that security means military security and military, you know, where you're better than the others. How do you say that in English? Not competition, but superiority. Yeah, superiority. Where at the end of the day, when we really talk about the right to live in safety and be able to freely, completely live our lives, people are not free and do not feel safe. And when we look at climate change coming, we know that we're not equally safe. We're not equally safe to what's going to happen. So let's put this in our discussion as well. Some of you would like to take the floor, ask a question. Yes, please go ahead. Would you like to come there? Then they can see you, but I don't know if, otherwise they can see your back. Okay.
I'm gonna try to be very fast because like with such great interventions, like I had a lot to think. So I'm gonna try just to make some points on something that I think is very interesting on regards on the things you were saying, and then a proposition for building. Well, we were speaking a lot about migration and racism, but and well, when I came to this workshop, I thought that like it would be very interesting also to bring the part of like more direct violence, like how racism is affecting like or proposing direct violence. And like as you've said, like I think it's very interesting like to know that much conflicts have like a racist root and colonial root. And we shouldn't like forget this when we are analyzing it, because when we're talking about Afghanistan or jihadism itself, like jihadism has been like is a reactionary movement to the denial of Islamic culture. I do not agree with jihadism for sure, but like I think it's a polarization, like it's a result, right? So without aiming to victimize Venezuela, I think that again here, like there is a colonial root in all the questions that is happening in Venezuela, and we should be repeating this in our discourses, because if we don't like repeat this when we analyze conflicts, like we're gonna be forgetting about it. And then like I wanted to point like how peace building is also being very racist, in the sense that like peace building is made by Europe, and it has a colonial root. So like while we keep thinking that we can build peace without taking into account the cultural strategies of the countries, and that we are trying to build nation states as European ones that might function here but will not function there, things will keep being like in a bad situation. And I think that's what happened in Afghanistan. I think that like what we are seeing today in Afghanistan is exactly the result of colonialism in peace building. So as I don't want to take more time, so my proposition here, and I want to like link it with what Carrie said about the narrative like thing. I think it's very important we change narrative like directly by visibilizing like all the mechanisms and the different cultures and the different communities we are working with, or we're visibilizing, and like all the peace building mechanisms that are already existing. And for example, like transitional justice mechanisms that like were present in these societies. So by changing this narrative, by giving importance to all these like cultural practices, I think that maybe we can somehow confront at least the theory of peace building, and then break the cycle of violence. So thank you.
Anybody else questions, wants to take the floor, ask something, our speakers, because otherwise I would go back to them and ask them to maybe intervene one more time, but feel free. Take the floor if you want.
Katerina, do you want to check out the questions?
Yes, why not? I mean, we had already, there are 3-4 very similar questions. What? Okay, there is a question here. There are some questions in this platform of the conference, reading it out loud for you. How can we address unconscious racism, stereotyping, microaggression, tokenism within groups who actually attempt to work towards peace? So how can we do anti-racist work within peace working groups and organizations? This is actually quite important. How can we abolish racism? The question as well. Yeah, but I do think, for example, this question could be part of our last input, let's say, in the room. Like, how can we really speak out truth, and how within the groups we're working in. Anybody else wants to take the floor? Otherwise, I would go back to our speakers online. Yeah, come on. You want to?
Hello. I was just wondering because there were some discussions of different types of warfare, like nuclear, chemical, kind of. So I just wanted to raise the point of like digital warfare and how that has like an impact on anti-racist work, like thinking about like the Pegasus spyware that was used to like target human rights activists and so on. And if you've encountered like in your work, like how that has changed the dynamic of your work maybe. So just like kind of an open question.
That's a very good question also. Could I add to your question also the fake news campaigns that also come when migration is discussed? So people on Zoom who I really wish were here in the room with us, I'm gonna go ahead and give you the floor one after the other, okay? So Christina, perhaps we start with you.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Oh,
Well, I wanted to say some things. I want to link some ideas that we are said, that have been said in the workshop. First of all, I want to say thank you to Nassim Lomani, and as he said and Marga said too. It will be important that one of the main conclusions of this event it is not recognize the Taliban regime by the international community, and about the propaganda that said Carrie after the question that the last the audience. About after the COVID, much of civil society, like citizen, has become like friends, controllers of the state. For example, in the issue that I already talked about in Venezuela, Venezuela had been created like as subject to control by national citizen in Colombia, in Peru, And I really think that this is thanks to the xenophobia policies of the institution. Linking the last idea about that Chrissy and Kasembe already said about the militarization borders and the extent the border outside of the real border of the state. This is what has been happening between Spain and the government of Morocco for years. The Spanish government paid the Moroccan to militarize their borders, so that people do not reach to the peninsula. When the Spanish government is late with the payment, Morocco opened the gates for people to come in and put pressure. It's a way to put pressure on the state on the Spanish government. So the problem with this is that people look for other less safe ways to get to Spain in this case. No, so this is what happened between European Union and Libya too, as well. So with this idea, I want to finish that other conclusion of this workshop will be push our countries to create safe routes to leave country to migrate. Thank you.
Unmuted?
Yeah, you're right.
Okay. Thank you very much, and thank you for the important call and reminder that we need to fight for legal, safe migratory routes as well. This is something that tends to be forgotten, but we need that as well. So Nassim, I will give the floor to you next. Are you ready?
Yes. Thank you again. I would like to raise 3 short points. One is, I think, it's a peace conference, peace congress, but I think one of the first things that we have to do when we are talking about peace, war, racism, security, I think we have to re-question all of those. What does it mean in our time? Because in international level, there is a peace deal between US and Taliban. There is a peace deal between Greek, Turkey, I don't know, Greek AU, Turkey AU deal. So we have to re-ask, what does it mean in our time, the peace? What does we mean when we are talking about peace? When we ask about security, security from whom, by whom, to whom? Most of the things, most of the horrible things are happening with beautiful names on our names. So we should re-question all of those things. Human rights, what does it mean today, human rights in 21st centuries? We are criticizing mostly things are happening far away from us, but we should rethink about what is happening inside our societies, inside our countries, in Europe, in the Western world. I think this is the first step if we want to renegotiate also among each other, also within the movement, within the process that we are trying to do things. And also in a time of social media and digital life, I think a lot of information does not mean knowledge also. That's why the most of the time, also we are victim of this fake news and also fake information, misunderstanding, misleading of the situation. I think we need to create alternative and the news and the information and the social movement or whatever we are living in. And I think the last point that I wanted to raise is that migration is going together with the situation that we are going to live in. What I mean, these days, there is an example of how things are connected to each other. I would post some photos if you want here, and I would ask, where are these photos from? Everyone would think that they are from refugee camps, I don't know, in Greece, in Turkey, in Libya, but they are not. They are photos of Greek people living in the island of Crete after an earthquake. People are living in horrible conditions, in tents, in camps, inside the cities. And they use the same method that they have been used dealing with the migrants refugee crisis of 2015 and so on. And they are doing exactly the same thing to the local people, and they're living in this weather that we had the storm these days, and they're living in that. At the same time, the Greek government is making a deal with France, buying almost 10 billion euro weapon from France in a time of multiply crisis. So this is, I think, a question we have to also ask. I don't believe being in solidarity with refugees or with migrants, it's something that we should do from a position of only privilege or philanthropic of things. It is a process that we have to connect our life with those people, because it is connected. The fences in the borders, the detention centers within the cities, the mistreatment of people just because they are belonging to other categories is not something that it's just happening to the others. The same thing is also about the anti-fascist movement. It's the whole thing that we are talking about: peace, war, racism, and everything. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carrie.
Thanks so much, Nassim, and that was great. I'm going to just maybe answer just that last question, because other points have been touched up on, which was about, you know, how can the peace movement commit to anti-racism and not fall into microaggressions? I think the biggest thing I want to say is two things. That, like, study is solidarity. You know, it's taken me, and I'm still studying, like, a lot of years to really come to where my understanding, and I'm still learning about what is colonialism, what is capitalism, how does, you know, how do we show solidarity to different people? And I think studying power and understanding power is a form of solidarity, because the more you study, the more you really do understand how the system that we all live under, which is capitalism, is something that affects all of us as working people. And through that connection, true solidarity is something that can be created when you recognize how your oppression is just 100% interlinked. And as someone who's from Australia, I'm from Gadigal land. One of the greatest Indigenous action groups says that, you know, if you've come here to help me, then, you know, I don't want your help, but if you've come here to be my accomplice and fight in this, and to be in this fight together, then I'll welcome you with open arms. And that's something that I think should be one of the biggest focus for the peace movement, especially if you are new to this journey of anti-racism.
Thank you, Carrie. Great. Marga?
Just a word answering. I mean, thinking the last question, Catherine, you rose, which is how can we improve the peace movement in order to stop any racism inside the movement? No? So it came to my mind the answer gave by the feminist movement, no? Because we women always demand our own voice. No? The question of the voices is important. No? How to give the voice to the people who has not. Or not accepting the narratives from people who think they talk on behalf of others who has no voices. So the idea that studying, as Carrie said, as a way of solidarity, I love the sentence, Carrie, I will take it from me. I mean, is also to understand that we can think, of course, in the reality of the refugees or people living in Afghanistan, but the best way is to listen to them and open the spaces to listen to them, listen the refugees of Venezuela and Colombia, listen the people from Afghanistan, and not allowing those who tell us the narrative on behalf of. Does not mean that they are right or not, but it's the only way to know the reality, not to stress these things. So the same in the peace movement. No? So I think it's important because the peace movement has not lived in Mars, no, lives in a society who has patriarchy, racism, hierarchy, things like this. But I think from the feminist movement, we can learn how can we must to demand the voices for the people who are not there. And I think is one of the best way to combat this idea of not listening and having the voices. We need to listen really.
Thank you, Marga. Kazamba.
I think in order for us to move forward, we have to have a definition of racism. And the definition of racism that I always work with, and is that racism is economic oppression, social exclusion, and personal degradation, right? And they work in that tandem. They work as a triage in that sensibility. Economic exploitation, social exclusion from political voicing and participation in citizenship, and personal degradation. Right, the degradation of your psychic self, right? And in order to confront that, I think that the issue around the system, I like this term, one of the siblings mentioned is reparations, right? Which is understanding that that we're looking to rebound economically, but also environmentally. That means expanding the commons. Taking away, land usage towards responsible stewardship, which is in conversation with our indigenous siblings. Expanding of political voice for all people and expanding of political citizenship. And the last part is like the repair towards their personal degradation and rehabilitation of personal histories, right? And so in this country right now in the United States, we're having this battle over critical race theory, right? Around who gets to teach history in the history books and things of that nature. And that's become a hot button issue because it's connected to the other two, right? And so my suggestion is that we always be mindful that today we always fight for that against personal degradation. That we understand people's history, that we fight for the history of oppressed people in the classroom, that these are part of the curriculums, from all the way from kindergarten all the way to college, as part and parcel of that fight against anti-racism, but also the fight against militarism, because the same people who are defending statues of military leaders who led rebellions for slavery are the same people who are wanting to support militarization and the militarization of our borders. There's a connection there. So I think that we have to make those connections too, in order to build a lasting movement for peace and against militarism.
Thank you very much, Kazamba and Carrie. Did I say Carrie? Chrissy, I'm sorry.
Hello again. I will repeat one sentence that I had earlier, which is, if class struggle is resolved through an international workers' revolution, and if empire and colonial powers are dismantled without an anti-racist, feminist, and queer ideology being at its foundation, there is no guarantee of non-repeat. And to the questions that we've heard both about tokenism, so what I mean by repeating that is that, like, I cannot trust a movement that doesn't include everyone, that doesn't include me and all my relations, that doesn't include those most directly impacted. To this point, Grace Lee Boggs taught us that we must transform ourselves to transform the world. And so part of this is not just doing external stuff, but it's also working on ourselves and on our own communities. I know that the pandemic has been a portal, and it has taught us that we have a choice in crisis, and we can root where we are, and we can proliferate solidarity economies. We can learn to support and defend our neighbors literally and figuratively. The world is already borderless for commerce. It is already borderless for trade. And if states aren't outdated, at least statelessness should be outdated. We are the experts in our own lives. No one is expressionless. And Black Lives Matter has taught us that the Black Lives Matter grassroots, to be very clear, has taught us that we need leaderful movements. And so I really appreciate Carrie's work on a decentralized and autonomous campaign. Thank you so much, Kumpa.
Hey, so thank you very much, everyone. Again, I'm going to try to do this thing. Yeah. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thank you to all the speakers and the input givers. I promise to the people in the room, we're going to take it outside. It's sunny, and we'll perhaps continue discussing, but I will disengage you now in Zoom. There will be a recording of this workshop. I'll email it to you. Thank you to everyone that has joined us online in the conference. Thank you to the people on WOVA, and talk to you soon. Live on, abolish Frontex and all military. Kick ass as you do. Bye-bye.